All right. Hello, everybody. If you're on this morning, happy Easter to you. I think we're up and running today. Sometimes I never know. um, this is one of those big Sundays, so I'm glad you're with us today. This is the Sunday that most people who associate with Christianity tend to show up on Easter and, of course, Christmas. So today is a day when you can really kind of muster up all of your connections to um, your spiritual life or the life of your faith community or Christianity at large, and kind of be present, focus again on what it means to think about the capacity of Easter dawn, the invitation to a new day after the display of violence that brought the life and teachings of Jesus to a bitter end, and the display of violence that's so prevalent in our time as well. How can we move beyond that into new territory together? Certainly, Easter is one of those days when we consider that together. So I'm glad you're here today, and hopefully we can spend some time together today. I'm going to focus particularly on a poet today who I think brings some wisdom to this day of celebration, this day of focus, and spend some time with her and with you today. So just a reminder to shout out to each other. It's a day to, especially if you're new to the feed or joining us at some point this morning, just to say hello in the comments section, pop up a few emoticons to fill the day with a little bit of energy, to create kind of the spirit of Easter Sunday as we gather together digitally in this virtual experience today. The other nice treat today that we are going to experience is we have a ministry and context student from Pacific Lutheran Theological Seminary, Sam Ledoux. And Sam is also an opera singer. And so she has worked with Martin to do a piece for today as well. And so at the end of my talk, I'll have them share a piece of music with you that they recorded the other day. And then Sam will be back at 11 o'clock today at the drive-in service to share some of those gifts as well. So a little bit of a treat for those of you who enjoy that type of music, this kind of operatic style that connects us to the wonder of Easter Sunday as well. So welcome, glad you're all here today. As I mentioned, I want to use today, as I often do on Easter. You know the story, so I don't have to tell you the story. I think more importantly, as we kind of grow and mature, it's not that we're trying to approach our spiritual lives by fostering a capacity to simply repeat the story. I think the challenge is how to see the story in our own lives, in our own context, how to, in some ways, have an awareness of what Easter might mean for us, for our time. And I think that's the real challenge. And today I'm using a poet that I've used in the past who I think invites us into that experience. The last line of her poetry that I'm going to use today is this: grant the smallest of claim, and the force of nature blasts back with lusty new rhythms. Let me say it again. Grant the smallest claim, and the force of nature blasts back with lusty new rhythms. Her poetry reminds us that at the heart of life, the heartbeat of life, is this regenerative ruckus, this capacity for regeneration. And springtime is nothing but a testimony to that reality, that in the cycles of life, in the turning of day after day, season after season, there is the ruckus of regeneration. And that is embedded in the very dynamism of the experience of life. There is a regenerative ruckus going on. How do you experience that and live into that and trust yourself to that? Her name is Deborah Kennedy. She is a poet. The first time I met Deborah was at a conference in San Francisco that was an attempt to explore the intersection between religious traditions, spirituality, indigenous wisdom, and the environment, and how the spiritual capacity of humanity had to be folded back into our relationship with the cosmos and the planet. It was a lecture series that I would attend with some friends, some local friends, and we would do that every year. And we would go over to San Francisco and sit through these lectures all day. They were mind-blowing, some of them. I mean, they just opened up your consciousness to the way in which world works, and also in the way in which kind of spirit and religious traditions might fit into that. Deborah was attending this year. And I remember sitting down with her at lunchtime and talking, and she was talking about her poetry. And she had published a book that I have with me today called Nature Speaks. And of course, because I was striking up a conversation with her and I had the author right in front of me, I ended up buying that book. And we invited her to dinner to join us, our little small group afterwards, because after the lecture series, we would go to Bar Agricole in San Francisco, and we'd have a great dinner party. And sometimes other people who were at the lecture series would join us. And we just had this robust conversation. And in talking to Deborah, I knew that our paths would cross again. I knew that someday I would find a way to fold her poetry into our common life at the church that I served, or in the community commons where we put on public events. A few years later, I ran into Deborah again. This time I was in her kitchen in Willow Glen, and we were going over the way we were going to construct a Earth Day experience. And that construction was going to include all of her poetic wisdom folded into the experience. And I remember getting to her house, and this is a house of an artist, and she had all her art on the walls, and her poetry was in front of us. It was just this kind of awesome experience to be engaged with somebody who approaches the world and the experience of world with an artistic lens, right? She found in her poetry and in her art a way to give expression to life that I felt tapped into some deeper place than I had yet to arrive, right? There was something so rich and deep about her poetry that I just knew that I could probably bask in this poetry for a lifetime and not ultimately ever tire of its capacity to invite me to see life in a different way. Her poetry, in some ways, was like regenerative ruckus. Read a piece, and you might reimagine the world in a different way. In some ways, her testimony to the world, her way of languaging her experience of life, reminded me of the text that's picked for today in Mark's gospel, where women are rushing to the tomb of Jesus after his death and his hurried burial in a grave, and a stone that's been rolled in front of that gravesite. And they're simply rushing there to do the burial rite, right? They're going to go anoint his body and probably engage in just the depth of grief of losing a friend like that. And their only question is, when they get there, how are we going to get that stone rolled away so we can kind of do this right? and to mourn and grieve his passing. And instead, when they arrive in the Easter story of Mark, the stone has been rolled back already. And there's a character inside of the grave, inside of this cave, a character that showed up previously in Mark's gospel. And in that moment, previously in Mark's gospel, this character tosses off all of his clothing and runs away naked, which I think is a metaphor for kind of just abandoning ship, right? He disappears. And he's the one who's in the tomb, but this time he's in the tomb and he's wearing the robes of a martyr. He's wearing white robes, the robes of a martyr, as if someone who gives their whole life to the cause is in this tomb now. And he says that Jesus is not here. In fact, if you want to engage Jesus, in some ways, you got to go back to back to Galilee and kind of start this journey over again. The women simply are dumbfounded. They are filled with fear and trembling, and they say nothing to anyone. They go completely silent. There's this moment in the story where that silence is gripping, and you wonder if they will ever speak again, right? They're just so overwhelmed by the experience. My guess is, if they were to speak again, and they don't in Mark's gospel, if they were to speak again, it would be poetry. Something struck them in that moment so profound that they were dumbfounded. They realized something about world that they had not realized before, to the point where it silenced them. My guess is their next words would be poetry. And so this poem by Deborah Kennedy, called Regeneration Ruckus. And as I read this poem, I want you to imagine that it is, if you will, a way of describing maybe what those women at the tomb might have described that day. Cypress Pond. It's written in brown ink with a lovely looping hand in 1807 in the field notes of the General Land Office. Cypress Pond marks the last fingerprint of the Mississippi River, pressed into the yielding soil of southern Illinois. The first peoples gave this swamp, Cypress Pond, they gave it to the herons and the hawks. But by 1900, brash young men ready to squeeze the juice from this fresh world felled the trees, drained the dark, still water, and planted instead row crops, corn for their cows. In 1960, the patient men at the State Fish and Game knitted together all the wandering water of that ancient swamp into one small lake, flat and blue as an Afghan on a sofa. They built tidy blinds where the hunters crouch in the sharp bite of daybreak's chill, waiting to shoot a duck and feel the grit men once carried in their bones. In 2003, an F4 tornado hit that space, sudden and hard, a bolt from above. The winds beyond wind ground through the forest's careless order and left behind an unholy mess. Soon, loggers roared through this shell-shocked land and hauled out all the blowdown trees set for the sawmill. Cypress Pond was no more. Cypress Pond at this point has been completely destroyed by the hands of men and by the power of nature. At this point in the poem, you have this sense of the capacity of the destructive power of humanity and the destructive power of nature, that things might come to an end. In many ways, at this point in the poem, it feels like Good Friday, where the natural body of Jesus and the force and the violence of empire designed to sustain the inequities of their time brought that life to its end. Cypress Pond, or the kingdom of heaven as it had been imagined, it was no more. And yet the poem goes on. Eventually, there were foresters that arrived to try to count every tree that was still left, stump standing or topped. They marked the grids, added up the numbers, and they shrewdly concluded that repeated disturbances hasten ecological surprise. Repeated disturbances hasten ecological surprise. Today, the buckeyes, the sassafras, the swamp ash are belting out hot new songs, saplings bursting up from every stump, and frowsy shrubs are running riot in the skid tracks. Each thicket pulses with the beat of nature's deep redemption. Grant the smallest claim, and the force of nature blasts back with lusty new rhythms. Man, I tell you, I love that poem. There is, at the heart of things, a regenerative ruckus. Repeated disturbances invite ecological surprise. Sometimes the end is only but yet a beginning. In Mark's Gospel, for those of you who follow that writer, it really ends in a strange way, right? It does not end with the reappearance of the body of Jesus. There are no bodily appearances in Mark's Gospel. There is only this kind of emptiness, the empty tomb, and an invitation on the part of the one who sits in as the embodiment of the martyr, the one willing to give all of their life for the cause, with a few words to go back to Galilee and live again the regenerative ruckus that was the life of Jesus. To, in a sense, give yourself to this great mystery that despite all of the violence and the grief and the sadness and the challenge and the inequities and the falling apart that society seems to generate on its own, there is at the heart of life itself a gift of regenerative capacity, the gift of surprise, and that you and I are called to live into that gift, to see with eyes beyond that which seems like the end to the capacity for something new that could begin again. It is not, however, a linear trajectory. And that's what's so mysterious about it, right? It's not as if you can kind of plot it out. It's cyclical. It goes round and round. And that's the way Mark's Gospel is, right? Mark's Gospel invites you to say, go back to the beginning now and start this journey again anew. And you'll probably start it anew and then land again at this same spot, but then go back and start again. There is this invitation to the wondrous cycle of life that is regenerative. And that's where you put your trust. I used to I used to work with a colleague that I dearly loved, and we would have these conversations, and I would ask him, why do you do this kind of work, as a clergy person? And why do you tackle the projects that you tackle? And he said, I want to tackle social justice projects that aren't going to get resolved in my lifetime. That in a sense, he trusted that even though he was going to hit a brick wall over and over again in the work that he did, that was not the goal. The goal was to trust that that kind of work has regenerative capacity, that along the long cycles of life that unfold, it will, change will happen. That the buckeye, the sassafras, the swamp ash will belt out new songs. That saplings will burst eventually from every stump, and frowsy shrubs will run riot in the skid tracks, and each thicket will pulse with the beat of nature's deep redemption. That's why he did the work. My guess is that in the stillness of the moment on Easter dawn, those women realized that that's what they were called to do as well. My guess is it would give them great pause, and with fear and trembling to return back to the very life that they had led up to this point, to realize that it would continue to be filled with all of the hurt and pain and suffering that they had experienced on the way, but they could enter into that life with some sort of new vision, maybe a poetic vision, maybe a vision linked to the wondrous cycles of life or the gift of new life that they witnessed on this morning. Whatever it happens to be, they were invited to journey back in a new way. My guess is that's what Easter was all about for them. That they would realize that repeated disturbances, it turns out, hastens ecological surprise. That Cypress Pond, crucified at the hands of men, now is redeemed, bursts with this redemptive capacity of earth itself. That's the wonder of it all. That's what gives us a sense of hope. Not that we have capacity to do this, that it is actually embedded in the very fabric of the life that we share. It's inside this life, waiting to burst out. That's the beauty, I think, of Easter Day. In 2013, December, Deborah Kennedy was simply crossing the street, right? And a couple cars stopped to let her cross, but one car did not see her. And at 35 miles an hour, that car ran into Deborah Kennedy, shattered body and bone, trauma to the brain, put her out, ended life as she knew it. Months and months, maybe years and years of recovery. Today, Deborah walks. Today, she still teaches and creates her art. Today, she even joins little churches like the one in Lafayette to do Earth Day events and read her poetry. She presents at museums and in universities. Deborah's body regenerated over the course of time. Grant the smallest of claim, Deborah would say. And the force of nature blasts back with lusty new rhythms. This Easter, may you grant small claim to the hope of the regenerative capacity of earth, of spirit, of the human journey into the heart of life itself. That to me feels like an Easter day worth celebrating. Amen. All right. Well, thanks all for kind of hanging out with me as I just spend some time with Deborah's poetry. It's for me, it's just another way to enter into the mystery of this day, and hopefully you experienced a little bit of that for yourself. You can always grab Deborah's book. It's called Art and Poetry for the Earth, Nature Speaks by Deborah Kennedy. I'll try to post a link to this on the Facebook feed when I get home today, so it'll be in there eventually. Just a lovely book that you don't read cover to cover, but if you pick it up periodically, you'll be surprised how it has capacity to reconnect you to the wonder and the mystery and the hope that is folded into the vibrancy of nature itself. A beautiful, beautiful piece of work. So with that, I want to give you a moment to kind of pause and reflect on Easter today. And to do that, I'm going to invite Martin and Sam to just share a piece of music before our announcement time. And to, I think, two fronts. As Sam sings today, if you know, the words are one thing, so you can try to tend to the words, but I think just try to allow the melody and the music to invite you again into the mystery of today. So enjoy a little music by Sam and Martin today.
Loud,
All right. Thank you, Sam and Martin, for that beautiful piece of music today. Lovely, lovely. So as you go about your day to day, just hang on to this idea, right? The idea in the piece of poetry and in the Gospel of Mark today. Cypress Pond, over the years, many years, crucified at the hands of men. And yet today, the buckeyes, the sassafras, the swamp ash are belting out hot new songs. Saplings bursting up from every stump and frowsy shrubs running riot in the skid tracks, each thicket pulsing with the beat of nature's deep redemption. Grant the smallest of claim, and the force of nature blasts back with lusty new rhythms. Amen. All right, blessed Easter to you all. Just a couple of announcements today, not much. Just have a good spring break. If you're on spring break, beautiful time with family and friends today together as we all try to find ways to stay in relationship with each other despite navigating vaccines and ongoing pandemic conditions. It's never easy, is it? Anyway, we'll all be trying to do some of that today as well. Maybe reaching out to family digitally, whatever works, but try to live into the wonder of this day. And then, of course, today is the last day to submit a photo to youth@oslc.net in our bake-off, our Easter bake-off. So if you take a picture of something beautiful that you baked today, send that in and we'll let you know who are our winners next Sunday when we gather together with some of our teenagers. And then a reminder, today we're on at 11 o'clock for an on-site worship with some singing, some music, trumpeter, celebration of Easter right here on site. So if you're willing to swing on by and experience that live, please do that today. I won't be using this piece of poetry today, but I'll be using the Gospel of Mark to continue to explore the way in which Mark kind of constructs the idea of Easter dawn, of resurrection for us today. So come down for that at 11 o'clock. And with that, we're going to say goodbye and invite those of you who would like to hang out afterwards. You can link to our virtual coffee hour. We'll have a brief one today because I have to get ready for the 11 o'clock service. But if you'd like to stop and say hi and share what you're doing for Easter today, feel free to do that. You can find that link at the OSLC website under media. And if you look at the Sunday events, you'll see virtual coffee hour. You can just click on virtual coffee hour. It'll take you right to this Zoom call. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a blessed Easter, and we'll see you next week.